The escape pod had no business being alive. It had no engine signal, no heat signature, no transponder ping. It was just a lump of scorched metal spinning slowly in the dark between the planet Durac and the research vessel Steadfast. The only reason anyone noticed it at all was because it clipped the edge of the ship's passive scan grid at 300 hours, and the sensor log flagged it as debris before a secondary check noted one small, irregular detail. Something inside it had a heartbeat. Dara Osa was not supposed to be awake at 300. She was the ship's xenobiologist, and her shift did not start for 4 more hours. But she had not been sleeping well since they arrived in Durac's orbit, and she had been sitting in the observation bay with a cold cup of something the ship's kitchen called coffee, watching the planet turn below them. It was a violent world. All red rock and black smoke and rivers of lava that glowed orange from space like veins in a living thing. It was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often are. She was still looking at it when the alert came through. She reached the scanner room before the night crew did. She pulled up the pod's data herself, read the heartbeat signal 3 times, and then went to find Rel. Rel was the senior Vorthari diplomat on board. He was tall, silver-skinned, and deeply unhappy about almost everything. He had made it clear from the first day that he did not think humans belonged on a mission this important. The Vorthari were old, civilized. They had been part of the Galactic Council for 600 years. Humans had been part of it for 11. In Rel's view, that gap explained most of the problems in the known galaxy. He was awake when Dara knocked. He answered the door in his full diplomatic clothes, which meant he had not slept either. She showed him the scan data. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said, ejected. Dara blinked. It's alive. It is a Voakai hatchling, Rel said, as though that settled the matter. The species has destroyed 3 colony ships. They are the reason we are here. They are the reason the Council has 12 days to decide whether to authorize orbital bombardment of an entire world. A juvenile Voakai is not a diplomatic opportunity. It is a liability. It's a baby, Dara said. It is a weapon that has not yet learned how to aim itself, Rel said, and closed his door. Dara stood in the corridor for a moment. Then she went to find Commander Sova. Sova was already on the bridge when Dara arrived. She was a broad, quiet woman from the Marin colony, the kind of commander who listened completely before she said anything. She read the scan data. She listened to Dara's argument. She listened to Dara's summary of Rel's argument. Then she looked out the viewport at the spinning escape pod and said, "Bring it in. Put it in the secondary cargo bay. Full containment protocols. You have 6 hours before Rel files a formal objection, and I want it stable before he does." The retrieval took 40 minutes. The escape pod was badly damaged, one side completely crushed, and when the cargo crew cracked it open they all stepped back fast. The smell alone was enough. Burning sulfur and something older, animal and fierce. And inside, curled in the wreckage of what looked like a colony ship emergency crate, was the hatchling. It was about the size of a large dog. Dark gray scales, still soft at the edges the way young things are. 2 wings pressed flat against its back, too small to be useful yet. Its eyes, when it opened them, were deep amber with no white around them at all. It looked at the cargo crew, and every person in that bay felt something very old in their blood say, "Run." Nobody ran, but nobody moved forward either. Dara moved forward. "Easy," she said, not to calm it. She did not know if it understood sound the way she did. She said it because saying it helped her stay slow and steady, and she needed to be slow and steady. She crouched down about 3 meters away. The hatchling pulled its lips back and showed teeth that were already impressive for something its size. A low sound came out of it, not quite a growl, something below that, something that vibrated in Dara's sternum more than her ears. She did not move. She just stayed there, crouched, hands visible, breathing evenly. The hatchling watched her. After 2 minutes it closed its mouth, not all the way, but a little. "Okay," Dara said quietly. "Okay, that's okay." She stayed until the med team had set up the containment unit. She stayed while the others left. She stayed until Rel's formal objection came through on her wrist pad, a full 7 paragraphs logged for the official record, demanding the hatchling be returned to space immediately on grounds of crew safety, mission integrity, and what he called basic galactic common sense. She read it, set her wrist pad face down on the floor beside her, and kept watching the hatchling. The hatchling, for its part, had stopped showing its teeth entirely. It had pressed itself into the far corner of the containment unit, which was the furthest it could get from Dara while still, somehow, keeping both amber eyes directly on her. It was watching her just as carefully as she was watching it. Outside the viewport, the planet Durac turned in its slow, ancient way, full of fire and creatures that the galaxy had already decided were not worth understanding. Dara had 12 days to prove them wrong. She was starting tonight. The hatchling set fire to the containment unit on the first morning. Not the whole unit, just the left wall panel, which turned out to be made of a polymer that nobody had thought to check for flammability because, in fairness, nobody had planned to put a fire-breathing juvenile Vorkai inside it. The suppression system handled it in 4 seconds. The hatchling sat in the middle of the smoke, looking entirely unbothered, and watched Dara through the blackened glass with those amber eyes. Dara called maintenance. Then she went back to sitting on the floor outside the unit, which had become her default position. She had been there most of the night. She had slept perhaps 2 hours against the wall, her jacket folded under her head, her wrist pad balanced on her knee. The ship's cook, a round-faced man named Basu who had never asked Dara a single question she did not want to answer, had appeared at 600 with a tray and left it silently beside her without comment. She had eaten without looking away from the containment unit. The hatchling had watched her eat with an expression that was, biologically speaking, unreadable, but felt, emotionally speaking, like intense suspicion. She had started talking to it that morning. Not because she thought it understood her words. She talked because silence felt wrong, and because she had read every piece of research ever published on Vorkai behavior, which amounted to 4 papers, 2 of which were mostly speculation, and 1 of which had been written by a researcher who had never actually seen a live Vorkai. The 4th paper was a field observation from a destroyed colony ship's final log, and she had read it so many times she had stopped being able to look at it. What she knew was this: the Vorkai were not mindless. They showed object permanence, problem-solving, complex territorial behavior, and what looked strongly like mourning rituals after the loss of a nestmate. They were also enormous, fireproof, and extremely hard to kill, which had led the Council to focus on those last 2 qualities and largely ignore the first 3. She was trying not to make that same mistake. "You're hungry," she said to the hatchling on the 2nd hour. "I know you are. I would be too. I'm going to try to figure out what you eat. I'm going to put something in the access tray, and I need you to not burn it immediately because that won't help either of us." The hatchling watched her. She had cross-referenced Durac's known geology and fauna with the ship's database and come up with a list of 11 possible food sources. She didn't have 10 of them. She had ship's protein rations, which she knew were wrong, and she had a block of something the database called mineral-dense synthrock, which was made for Grethian crew members and tasted, she had been told, like a cave. She put both in the access tray. She slid it through. The hatchling walked over, sniffed the protein ration, and then breathed a very small, very controlled flame directly onto it. Then it ate it. Hot, apparently, was correct. Dara made a note. Then the hatchling picked up the synthrock, turned it over twice with 1 clawed forefoot, and flung it at the far wall with what could only be described as contempt. "Okay," Dara said. "Protein hot, noted." She got burned twice that day. The first time was when she tried to enter the unit to replace the wall panel, and the hatchling disagreed with her presence. The second time was when she reached through the access tray to adjust the temperature sensor and was a little too slow. Neither burn was serious. The ship's medic, a quiet Vorthari named Asa who disagreed with Rel about most things, treated both and did not ask questions, though her expression said she had several. On the second night, Dara started humming. She did not plan it. She was tired, and tired people do things without planning them. She was sitting with her back against the containment unit, updating her notes, and she started humming something her mother used to hum, an old song from back home, slow and low. She did not even notice she was doing it until she realized the hatchling had gone quiet. She looked up. It was pressed against the inside of the containment wall, right behind her, separated by the panel but as close to her as it could get. Its eyes were half closed. Its breathing had slowed. She kept humming, very carefully, very still. It fell asleep like that, pressed against the wall behind her, its small scaled side rising and falling in the slow rhythm that she was beginning to understand. Then it felt safe enough to stop watching for a moment. Dara did not move for a long time after that. Rel came by at 2100 and stood at the observation window for 4 minutes without saying anything. She knew he was there. She did not turn around. When she finally looked, he was gone. But she noticed, when she checked her mission log later, that the ejection order he had filed the night before had been quietly removed from the active queue. She did not know who had done that. She suspected Sova. She added a note to her research file that night. It said, "Subject responds to low-frequency vocalization, possible resonance sensitivity. Investigate." Below that she wrote, in smaller letters, more for herself than for any official record, "It trusted me first. I have to be worth that." Outside, Jurek glowed in the dark, red and old, and full of things the galaxy did not yet know how to listen to. On the fourth day, the planet came up to meet them. There was no warning. The deep scan array was watching for movement on the surface, as it had been doing since they arrived, logging the usual volcanic activity and the occasional thermal bloom that meant a Voakai pack was moving. What it was not designed to detect was something rising fast from inside a magma field, because nothing biological was supposed to be able to do that. Kron came up through fire. The first alert called it a geological event. The second alert, 12 seconds later, revised that. The third alert simply said contact, and every screen on the bridge turned red. Sova did not shout. She never shouted. She said, "All stations," in a voice that was very calm and very fast, and the bridge crew moved without a word. Weapons locked. Shields came up. The ship's AI began calculating intercept trajectories for something enormous moving at a speed that should not have been possible for an organism. Dara heard the alerts from the cargo bay. She looked at the hatchling. The hatchling was already awake. It had been awake before the alarms, she realized. It was standing in the center of the containment unit, completely still, its head lifted, its nostrils moving. Its amber eyes were focused on the hull wall as if it could see straight through it to the dark outside. Dara ran for the bridge. What she saw on the main screen stopped her at the doorway. Kron was not attacking. It had slowed as it entered orbit range, pulling up from its vertical ascent and leveling into a long, wide circle around the ship. The scale of it was hard to process. It was longer than the Steadfast from nose to tail. Its wingspan, when it extended fully to catch the thin upper traces of Jurak's thermosphere, blotted the sensor grid in 3 directions. Ancient scars ran across its hide in long, pale lines. One eye, the one that turned toward the ship on each pass, was deep red gold and completely steady. It was not attacking, it was circling. "Weapons ready," Rel said. He was standing at the back of the bridge, still and precise, his silver hands folded behind him. "Hold," Sova said. "Commander, if it decides to." "I said hold." Sova did not look at him. She was watching the circle. "It's had 4 passes. If it wanted to hit us, it would have hit us." She turned to Dara. "Talk to me." Dara was already pulling up the behavior file on the nearest console. "Circling is a nest behavior," she said. "Voakai circle something they are assessing. Not hunting, assessing. Assessing for what? I don't know yet, but she was starting to. She looked back at the bay feed on the secondary screen. The hatchling was still standing in its containment unit, but now it had moved closer to the outer wall. Its whole body was oriented toward the hull, toward where Kron was circling. It knows, Dara said. The hatchling knows it's out there. Rel made a sound. That is precisely why we should have. Rel Sova's voice was quiet. Not now. Dara was already moving. She went back to the cargo bay, pulled up the external viewport controls, and did something that required her to override 2 safety protocols and type her authorization code twice. She opened the blast shield on the cargo bay's outer viewport. It was thick glass, triple reinforced, looking directly out into space. And then she went to the containment unit. I need you to trust me, she said to the hatchling. I know you don't know what that word means, but I need you to anyway. She opened the containment unit. The hatchling did not move for a long moment. Then it walked out slowly, its claws clicking on the cargo bay floor, and went straight to the viewport. It pressed its face against the glass. And outside, on the next pass, Kron came around again. The moment Kron's massive eye aligned with the viewport, everything changed. Kron stopped circling. It hung in space just off the hull, which should have been impossible, great wings spread wide and still, held by nothing visible. Its red-gold eye was fixed on the viewport, on the hatchling on the other side of the glass. The hatchling made a sound Dara had not heard before. Not fire. Not the low warning vibration it used when it was afraid. Something else entirely. High and thin and complicated, like a note played on an instrument she had never heard. It pressed both small 4 feet flat against the glass. Outside, Kron made the same sound back. The hull vibrated with it. The cargo bay walls hummed. Every loose item on the shelving units rattled. Dara felt it in her teeth and her chest and somewhere behind her eyes. Then Kron landed on the hull. Gently. That was the word that kept coming to Dara later when she thought about it. Gently. Something the size of a warship settling onto the hull of the Steadfast with a care that made the whole vessel shudder only slightly, the way a large and careful thing moves when it is trying not to break something small. On the bridge, every weapon system was still armed. Every crew member was still at their station. The silence was total. Rel stood very still at the back of the bridge for a long moment. Then, quietly, almost to himself, he said, "It came for the child." Nobody answered him. There was nothing to say. On the cargo bay floor, the hatchling had stopped making sounds. It was just standing at the viewport with its feet against the glass, looking out. And it looked, in a way Dara could not fully explain in any scientific language she had ever been taught, like something that had just remembered it was not alone. Kron did not move from the hull. For 2 full days, the ancient Voakai sat on the outside of the Steadfast like a gargoyle on a cathedral roof, and the ship sat in orbit around Durak, and nobody on board slept particularly well. The hull sensors confirmed its weight constantly. The external cameras showed it breathing slowly, eyes half open, occasionally shifting one massive wing. It was not threatening anything. It was not doing anything. It was simply present, in the enormous and total way that very old things are present, with a patience that felt older than the ship, older than the mission, older possibly than the Galactic Council itself. The hatchling had started bringing Dara things. This had begun on the morning of the 5th day and showed no signs of stopping. The first offering was a bent sensor coupling it had pulled from somewhere it should not have been able to reach, left at her feet while she was reviewing data. The second was a length of insulation foam, chewed at one end. The third was one of Basu's kitchen towels, which explained why Basu had seemed confused at breakfast. Dara accepted each one with the same quiet seriousness she would have given a gift from anyone. She said thank you. The hatchling watched her say it, then went back to whatever it had been doing. Rel came to the cargo bay on the 5th afternoon and stood at the door without being invited in. which was more hesitation than Dara had ever seen from him. "I want to help," he said. Dara looked at him for a moment. "With what?" "The frequency analysis." He came in without waiting for a further response, walked to the secondary console she had been using and looked at her data. He was quiet for a while. Then, "You believe the Voakai communicate below audible range?" "I believe they communicate across multiple ranges simultaneously," Dara said. "What we hear is probably the top layer. There's more underneath. The hatchling has been producing subvocal tones since the first night. I've been recording them, but I don't have the processing power to isolate the patterns. Rel, the Vorthari communication archives go back 4,000 years. Do you have sub-frequency mapping tools?" He was already sitting down. "Yes." They worked through the night. Basu brought food at some point, and neither of them acknowledged it. The hatchling lay in the corner of the cargo bay, one eye open, watching them with the relaxed but complete attention of an animal that has decided something is probably safe but wants to keep checking. What they were building was a translation map, not a dictionary, nothing that clean, more like a landscape with peaks and valleys of frequency, patterns that repeated, sequences that appeared in different combinations like words being rearranged into new sentences. Rel had a tool, old and precise, that the Vorthari used to study resonance languages in crystalline life forms. It had never been used on a biological subject before. It turned out to work very well. By 400, they had something. Kron had been repeating a sequence since it landed on the hull. The same pattern, over and over, on a frequency that the ship's standard systems had been logging as background vibration and ignoring. Rel ran it through the mapping tool 4 times to be sure. Then he leaned back and looked at the result on the screen and said nothing for a while. Dara leaned over and read it. The translation was rough. The tool flagged it as low confidence, partial, possible error at 3 points, but the core of it was consistent across all 4 runs. "Give back mine." 3 words, 2 days of repetition. A creature the size of a warship sitting on the hull of a vessel it could have torn open like a ration pack, saying the same thing over and over with the steady, unshakable patience of something that had never once considered giving up. Dara sat down. She did not say anything for a moment. "It knows the hatchling is here," Rel said. "It was not a question." "It knew before it left the planet," Dara said. "That's why it came up. It tracked the pod." She looked at the hatchling in the corner. "Kron isn't the pack alpha hunting something. Kron came after something specific." "The child," Rel said quietly. "Yes," Dara looked at him. "Rel, this is not an animal protecting territory. This is a parent looking for a lost child, across orbit, in space, with enough restraint not to destroy the ship even when it had every reason to." Rel was silent for a long time. The kind of silence that means a person is revising something large and important inside themselves, and it is slow work. Then he said, "What do we do?" Dara turned back to the console. She pulled up the mapping tool and started building the sequence in reverse, assembling Kron's own words into something the ship's hull speakers could transmit on the correct frequency, a message shaped from the creature's own language, played back at it from the outside of the ship. "We answer," she said. She ran the sequence 3 times to check it. The hatchling, across the bay, lifted its head. Then she played it through the hull. The vibration hit them before the sound did. The whole ship rang with it, a deep and resonant note that moved through the floor and the walls and the air all at once. Every loose panel hummed. The lights flickered once. Basu's tray of untouched food slid 6 centimeters to the left. Outside on the hull, Kron went completely, absolutely still. It was the stillness of something that had just heard, for the first time in a very long time, something it recognized. Dara checked the clock, 8 days remaining. She looked at Rel. He was looking at the hull camera feed at the image of Kron frozen and listening on the other side of the ship's outer skin. For the first time since she had met him, He did not look like he had already made up his mind. Nobody thought she would actually go outside. Sova had listened to the plan with the particular stillness she used when she was deciding whether something was dangerous or just impossible. Rel had not listened quietly at all. He had argued for 11 full minutes, which was a long time for him, and at the end of it he had said, "This is not diplomacy. This is a human being standing on a hull next to something that could swallow her whole," and Dara had said, "Yes, that's what I said." And then Sova had said, after a pause long enough to feel like weather, "Suit up. Tether line, short range, no weapons. I'll give you 40 minutes." So Dara suited up. The airlock cycled with the usual sounds, pressure equalizing, seals confirming, the small mechanical voice of the ship checking her oxygen levels and her heart rate. Her heart rate was high. The ship noted this. She told it to stop nodding it. The outer door opened. Space was always the same and always different. The steadfast hull stretched ahead of her, gray and solid, studded with sensor nodes and comm arrays and the small running lights that blinked on their slow rhythm. And on the far side of the ship's central section, massive and ancient and utterly still, Kron waited. Dara walked. The magnetic boots made it slow going. Each step required deliberate placement, a small pull, then the next step. She went around the curve of the hull toward the forward section, and with each meter Kron became more real, bigger. The images from the cameras had not prepared her for the scale of it up close. Its hide was dark and layered, like volcanic rock that had cooled over something still burning underneath. The pale scars running across its flanks were each longer than she was tall. And the eye. When it turned toward her, it was the size of the cargo bay viewport, deep red gold, steady, and completely alive with something that had no name in any language she had ever studied. She sat down. On the hull, in front of it, magnetic boots holding her to the surface, knees pulled up, hands visible, the way she had sat on the cargo bay floor on the first night with the hatchling. The same posture, small and open and unthreatening and present. Inside, she knew, the bridge crew was watching every sensor simultaneously. Rel had his hand on the emergency recall. Sova was probably not blinking. Kron lowered its head. Slowly, not quickly the way something does when it is about to strike. Slowly the way something very large moves when it is being very careful. The head came down, and the heat of it reached Dara through her suit's thermal layer, a deep dry warmth that smelled even through the sealed air supply like stone and fire and age. The eye settled at her level, focused, direct. She played the frequency sequence from her suit's external speaker. The translation tool gave her 6 phrases constructed from Kron's own patterns. She played them in order. We hear you. We have your young. We did not take. We found. We kept safe. We give back. Each phrase went out as a sub-frequency vibration through the suit speaker and through the hull beneath her and into the space between them. She watched Kron's eye as each one landed. Nothing changed in that enormous face, not in any way she could read clearly, but between the 4th and 5th phrase something shifted, some tension in the way the head was held, some quality of the stillness, and she thought, it understands. Not every word, not the way she understood language, but the shape of it, the intent of it. We are not enemies. We are people who found something precious and kept it safe until you came. She finished the 6th phrase, silence. Then she did the thing that made Rel say afterward that he had actually stopped breathing. She reached out, one gloved hand extended, palm up, fingers open. The same gesture she had used with the hatchling on the 2nd day through the access tray, the gesture that meant, in no specific language and in every language at once, I am not holding anything. I am not hiding anything. Here is my hand and it is empty and I am giving it to you. 41 seconds passed, she counted them. Then Kron moved. The snout, the very tip of something that could have broken the ship's hull, came forward in 1 slow centimeter at a time and settled against her palm. It was warm, impossibly warm. The heat coming through her glove in waves, and rough in a way she had not expected, not jagged but ridged, like the bark of a very old tree. She kept her hand flat and still. She kept her breathing even. Inside her helmet her eyes were full, which she had not planned, but she was not going to look away. The suit mic was live the whole time. When she finally found her voice, what she said was, "I think we just had a conversation." On the bridge, someone exhaled so loudly it came through the open comm channel. Inside the cargo bay, the hatchling had pressed both small forefeet against the viewport glass and was making the high, complicated sound again, the one that had no name yet in Dara's notes, but that she had started privately calling a song. Kron held still against her hand for a long moment. Then it lifted its head very gently and made a sound through the hull that the ship's sensors logged as a 7.2 magnitude vibration event, and that Dara, sitting on the hull with her hand still warm and tingling, recognized immediately. It was the same sound the hatchling made. The same note, the same structure, just larger. The way a parent's voice and a child's voice carry the same sound, shaped by the same history, separated only by size and years. She played it back from her suit speaker, as best the tool could reconstruct it. Kron went still. Then slowly, it moved back. Not away. Just back enough to look at her again with that great red-gold eye, and what she saw there was something she could not prove and would not put in her official report but would carry for the rest of her life. It had understood her. Not the words, the fact of her. She stayed on the hull for the rest of her 40 minutes. When the airlock cycled back and her boots hit the inner floor and her helmet came off, Rel was standing there. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, in a voice that was very carefully not what it had been 6 days ago, "Tell me what you need for the council presentation. I will help you build it." 6 days left, and for the first time they felt like enough. The Galactic Council met in full session for the first time in 9 years. There were 42 species represented in the chamber, physically or by transmission, seated in the rising curved rows of the council hall on Veth Station. The bombardment authorization had been on the agenda for 11 days. It was supposed to be a formality. The Volkai case was considered closed by most of the senior delegations, a threat assessment that had gone through the proper channels and arrived at the obvious conclusion. The vote had been postponed twice already, first because of the hatchling retrieval, then because of Rel's encrypted message, and now the chamber was full and the chamber was impatient, and most of the people in it had already decided. Then the transmission from the Steadfast came through. Dara's face appeared on the main screen. She was sitting on a cargo crate. She had not changed out of her field clothes. Her hair was not arranged for a council presentation. She had a data pad in one hand and a small dragon in her lap. The chamber went very quiet. The hatchling was asleep. It was curled in a tight circle, its tail wrapped around itself, its small head resting on Dara's knee. One of its wings was spread slightly, draped over the edge of the crate, catching the cargo bay light. It looked, to the 42 species watching, like nothing they had been briefed to expect. Dara began. She spoke for 22 minutes. She did not use diplomatic language. She used the language of a person who had spent 12 days on the floor of a cargo bay earning the trust of something everyone else had written off. She presented the frequency mapping data. She presented the behavioral analysis. She showed the footage of Kron's ascent, Kron's circling, Kron landing on the hull with impossible gentleness. She played the recording of the hull sequence. Give, back, mine. She let that sit for a moment before she continued. She said, "The Volkai are not a threat classification. They are a species that was never spoken to. The colony ships did not land on uninhabited ground. They landed on nesting territory, without communication, without warning, without any attempt to understand what they were entering. The Volkai responded the only way they knew how, because no one had ever tried to show them another way." She said, "One hatchling, lost in an escape pod, probably jettisoned during the destruction of a colony ship, survived. A human found it and kept it alive. An ancient Voakai came up from a volcanic world and sat on the hull of a research vessel for 6 days, not attacking, not demanding, not destroying, saying the same thing over and over in the only language it had. Give back mine. She said the language exists. We have the beginning of it, we can learn more. We can go back, we can do this differently. Then she looked directly into the camera and said, I am asking you not to bomb a world because it was never given the chance to understand us. The chamber did not respond immediately. Chambers never did. But Dara was watching the feed window in the corner of her screen where Rel's delegation was visible, and she saw the moment when the senior Vorthari delegate leaned toward Rel and said something, and Rel answered, and the senior delegate leaned back with an expression that was not agreement, not yet, but was no longer what it had been before. Then Rel stood. This was not on the agenda. Standing to speak outside the designated response period was a procedural violation that carried 3 tiers of formal censure under council law. Rel stood anyway, and he spoke, and what he said was simple and very clear. He said he had come on this mission believing humans were too young and too imprecise for work of this importance. He said he had been wrong. He said the human xenobiologist on the Steadfast had done, in 12 days, what 600 years of Vorthari protocol had not done, which was treat an unknown species as something worth knowing. He said he was formally supporting the request to reclassify the Voakai and indefinitely suspend the bombardment authorization. The chamber was very loud after that, for a while. The vote, when it finally happened, was not close. When the result came through to the Steadfast, Basu made something in the kitchen that he claimed was celebratory, and that tasted mainly of overconfidence and too much sugar, and the crew ate it anyway. Sova read the official result aloud in the cargo bay, which had become, in some informal way, the center of the ship. Dara listened with the hatchling pressed against her leg and her hand resting on its back, feeling the slow rise and fall of its breathing. The new classification would take 30 days to process through the formal registry. A second mission was being proposed, a full contact team, with Dara's frequency mapping as the foundation of the communication protocol. There was talk of establishing a non-entry boundary around Durak's nesting territories. There was talk of a lot of things. And then the outer hull sensor pinged. Kron was moving. They all looked at the camera feed. The ancient Voakai had lifted from the hull for the first time in 6 days, hovering just off the ship's side, wings spread wide. And then it did something none of the sensor arrays had protocols to describe. It moved to the cargo bay external viewport, that thick triple-reinforced glass, and it waited. Dora looked down at the hatchling in her lap. The hatchling was already awake, already watching the viewport with both amber eyes wide open. Dara looked at Sova. Sova looked at the viewport at the camera feed at Dara. She said nothing. She did not need to. She was giving Dara the decision, the way she had been doing, quietly from the beginning. Dara walked to the cargo bay door control. She opened the outer cargo access, the large one, the one used for equipment transfer with a clear line between the ship's interior and open space. A contained gap, a doorway. She stepped back. The hatchling walked to the opening. It stood there for a long moment, 1 foot inside the ship, 1 foot at the edge. It looked back at Dara. She crouched down. She was not going to cry in front of the crew. She was almost certainly going to cry in front of the crew. Go on, she said, go home. The hatchling looked at her for 3 more seconds with those amber eyes. Then it made the sound, the high complicated song, and turned and went through the door. Outside, Kron caught it. The size difference was enormous, the hatchling small as a leaf against that ancient scaled body, and Kron folded one great wing around it in a motion so careful it looked like something practiced across millions of years of instinct. Then Kron turned its red-gold eye toward the viewport one last time. It held there, looking in, looking at Dara specifically. In the way she now knew, it looked at things it had categorized and decided about. It held for 12 seconds. Then it dove back toward Durac, fast and clean, and was gone into the volcanic clouds in moments. And the planet turned below them the same as always, red and ancient and full of fire. Dara stayed at the viewport for a while. The crew left her to it, quietly, the way crews do when they understand something important has just happened, and words would be less than the moment. Rel was the last to leave. He paused at the cargo bay door and said, in the careful voice of someone who was still learning how to say things like this, "For what it is worth, what you did here will be studied for a long time." Dara did not turn around. "Good," she said. "Maybe next time someone will try talking first." He left, she stayed. Below her, Durac burned. And somewhere in the fire, something ancient was carrying something small back to where it belonged, because one human had looked at the impossible and decided it was worth sitting on the floor for. The galaxy would spend a long time figuring out what to do with that. Dara was already thinking about the next mission.